work at the psychology department of the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Due to some personal circumstances, I couldn't be there with you today, so that's why you are listening to a recording of mine. But by not flying there, I mean all the way to Brazil from the Netherlands, I also saved a lot of CO2 emissions. And as this conference is about sustainable mobility, I rather see it as my personal contribution to the goals of this conference. And my talk today is also about reducing CO2 emissions, not in the domain of flying, but in the domain of car use. So more specifically, I'm going to talk about reduced car use and acceptability of car use reduction policies by having a psychological perspective. So, I work at the environmental psychology department, and as an environmental and traffic psychologist, we mostly look at the interaction of human and the environment. And we have two lines of research. The first line of research is actually about looking at how the environment affects human quality of life. For instance, air pollution has certain effects on human health. And the second and most important line of research is to investigate how we human beings actually affect environmental quality. And with the current discussions on global warming and high CO2 emissions, the second line of research is actually quite important. And what we do with the second line of research is basically we try to understand how we can reduce the environmental impact of humans by changing their behaviors. And there we basically investigate individual and social factors. Well, behavioral change is very important in the domain of mobility as well, because mobility needs behavioral change to be sustainable. But then what kinds of changes are needed when we talk about environmentally sustainable mobility? Well, the single most important behavior is actually boils down to car use, because car is still one of the most dominant means of transport. The majority of people are still addicted to their cars and would prefer using a car instead of other means of transport. And using cars has severe environmental impacts due to the burning of fossil fuels. So the type of behaviors that I'm going to focus on in my presentation is actually about car use and, for instance, reducing individual car use or helping people to switch other types of transport modes, such as, for instance, using bikes or public transport, or helping people adopting more environmentally friendly alternatives to cars, such as e-vehicles or hybrid cars. But such behaviors are really hard to execute if people do not find policies that aim at car use reduction acceptable. So also in my line of research, I'm also interested in convincing people sort of to accept car use reduction policies, sort of searching ways by using psychological theories to convince people accept car use reduction policies, so that we can actually convince them to change their behavior. But we should all acknowledge that reducing car use is not an easy task, because reducing car use means that you should also, for instance, use alternative modes of transport, such as bikes, when it's not really convenient to do so, for instance, when it's raining or very hard. Or we know that public transport is not always the most convenient option, because it might be quite crowded or busy in the public transport. So reducing car use can be quite effortful and inconvenient. And actually driving a car and using a car can be quite fun and easy to do. So what kind of psychological factors predict car use reduction, despite the discomfort that comes with it? I would like to talk about some studies that we carried out in my lab here in the Netherlands. And the majority of our research actually focuses on individual values as predictors of environmentally friendly behavior. Values are defined as guiding principles in life, what we find important in life. And values are quite powerful in affecting our attitudes, our norms, our behaviors, by coloring our perceptions and cognitions. And years of research in our lab actually revealed 4 types of values that are particularly important when it comes to environmentally friendly behavior. Hedonic values, egoistic values, altruistic values, and biospheric values. So people who find hedonic values important would behave environmentally friendly when there is a fun aspect associated with it. For instance, hedonic people would reduce their car use and would go by bike if biking is a fun activity. People who endorse egoistic values would act pro-environmentally when there is a financial gain associated with it. People who value altruistic values, we found, would act environmentally friendly when the behavior would benefit other humans, when it would benefit the social welfare of others, for instance, buying organic, fair trade products. And finally, and most importantly, what we found over and again is that people who value the biosphere, people who find biospheric values important, would act pro-environmentally because it's the right and moral thing to do, and because they want to save and protect the environment and the earth. And another important finding that we showed over and again is that these values are quite universal. We carried out our studies in several different countries, in East, West, European countries, recently in Argentina and Russia. And everywhere we see that these 4 values are actually quite predictive of environmentally friendly and unfriendly behavior. So these 4 values are universal and they are quite effective in predicting environmentally friendly behavior. But how do values work? Values influence behavior mainly indirectly, and here I want to talk about the value belief norm theory by Stern, which we use quite heavily actually in our lab. And I'm going to talk about a couple of studies that we carried out by using this theory. More specifically, values influence behavior-specific beliefs, and then in return, behavior-specific beliefs affect personal norms, which are norms regarding what you think is the right thing to do. And when we have a personal norm about the behavior, then actually executing that behavior is more easier. If you now look at the causal chain on the screen, for instance, values predict whether you are aware or unaware of an environmental problem. And if you are aware of an environmental problem, and then you are most likely to think, to believe that you might help the solution of this problem by changing your own behavior, for instance, by reducing your car use. And if such belief is there, and then you develop a personal norm about reducing car use, and in turn, actually, you would most likely reduce your car use. So we tested this theory in relation to the end behavior of intention to reduce car use and acceptability of car use reduction policies in several different countries. And as we expected, what we found over and again was always the same. Biospheric values led to high awareness regarding the problems that are arisen by car use, and such problem awareness actually also makes biospheric people think that they should reduce their own car use because they can make a change, they can influence the outcome, they can make a good difference, and then they are the ones also to say that they have a personal norm for reducing their car use and switching to other modes of transport, environmentally friendly modes of transport. And in the end, what we see is that biospheric values, people with high biospheric values, they also have high intention to reduce their car use, and they also find acceptability of car use reduction policies that are enforced by the local governments much more acceptable. And what we also see, that the other types of values, like the egoistic or hedonic, actually do just the opposite. Because people who value hedonic or egoistic aspects, they're usually already not aware of the environmental problems. So they usually just stuck already on the first step of this value triggered norm activation. So what this first line of research shows is that we should, as a strategy, try to strengthen biospheric values of people, because as I told you earlier, biospheric values seems to be quite universal. But although people value the environment, if the context does not allow them to act on their values, for instance, if there are no biking facilities or if there are no public transport services in one's neighborhood, then reducing car use would not be an option. So we should help people to act on their biospheric values, but by making it possible infrastructurally and by relevant policies. So this is one strategy. But pro-environmental actions, we should also acknowledge, like reducing car use, are not always easy, as I already explained. So even for biospheric people, biking would be very difficult if it's raining like cats and dogs. Or sometimes, it might be quite effortful or quite difficult to just step out of your car or use public transport because it might not be fun. So another type of strategy that we should maybe aim for is to reduce this value conflict and to make pro-environmental actions a bit fun and beneficial for the individual. So would that strategy work actually when it comes to car use reduction, for instance? We also looked into this aspect in our lab. More specifically, my colleague Jan-Willem Boldersijk looked at it. And in the first study that he carried out, what he did was he had a field study with drivers. He put GPS devices on the vehicles of those drivers. And half of the drivers were told that if they actually have an eco-friendly driving style, so if they do not speed much, then they would have a discount in their insurance premium. So financial incentive, financial gain was there if they act eco-friendly. And the other group of participants were not told about this, but they were just told, we are going to monitor your driving behavior for some time and drive as you would normally do. And with the GPS device, the driving behavior, the speeding behavior of drivers were measured before the intervention, during the intervention, and after the intervention. And the question here was whether the financial incentive would really make people adopt an eco-driving style. And the result was quite interesting. What you see here on the screen is the pre-measure, so before the intervention, before the financial incentive, and then for 2 times during the incentive, and finally a post-measure when the financial incentive was removed. And the straight line is the incentive group and the dotted line is the control group. And what you nicely see is that you should look at the second and third time, which are the intervention times. So the people who were given the financial incentive, actually, they decreased their speeding behavior. So they adopted a more like eco-driving type of style when the financial incentive was there, when they knew that they would get a discount. They were driving much slower. But as soon as the financial incentive was removed, as soon as the discount was not there anymore, which is now the time 4, you see that those people in the intervention group increased their speeding behavior significantly, and then there was no difference between the control and the experimental group. So what this study nicely shows is that when the financial incentive is there, you might make people behave environmentally friendly, but as soon as you remove this financial incentive, they fall back to their habitual behavior. So there's no long-term change in the behavior. And in a similar study, what Jan-Willem Boldersijk did is this time to see whether a financial message or an environmental message would work best to convince people to have a tire pressure check for their cars, because as you know, a tire pressure check is important to reduce your fuel consumption, but also to reduce your CO2 emissions. So in a petrol station, what he did was he had 3 conditions, and in one condition there was an environmental message which said, do you care about the environment? Take a coupon for free for a free tire check. And in another condition, it said, do you care about your finances? If you care about your finances, take a coupon for free tire check. And then in the control condition, there was no such message, but there was just an offer for a free coupon. And when we ask people at this stage which message would work best, we usually hear that people think, okay, the financial message should work best because people care about their finances more than the environment. Whereas Jan Willem Bolderdijk found just the opposite. Actually, more coupons were taken in the environmental message condition. I think actually just a couple of coupons were taken in the financial message condition. And that is because the financial gain you receive by having your tire pressure checked is so little, people find it not really worth the effort. So it's not really worth the effort to take a coupon for free and to have your tires checked just for a couple of cents. Whereas people find small environmental gains more valuable. And that's the reason why more coupons were taken in the environmental message condition. We like to act upon environmental values and environmental messages because it makes us feel good about ourselves, because we believe that then we make a meaningful contribution to something. So small gains are not important when it's financial, but small gains are important when they are environmental. That was the outcome of this research. I think I'm already exceeding my time, but to conclude, the results of our line of research in my lab suggests that car use reduction and acceptability of car use reduction policies are possible, are actually more possible and prevalent among people who value the environment, so people who value the biospheric values. And as biospheric values are universal and apparently innate in many of the cultures and countries, what we need to do is to target those situational cues that activate and support people's biospheric values, to make it possible that people can act on their biospheric values. And another important outcome of our line of research is that financial incentives do not work as well as environmental feedback or messages, because financial incentives have very short-term effects, and people really ignore small financial gains, whereas they do not ignore small environmental gains. So what we say is policies and interventions should stress the positive environmental impact of reducing car use, so the collective benefit of reducing car use, and not the financial gains associated with it. And policies should somehow help people to strengthen their biospheric values and sort of help them to be able to act on their environmental values. Well, thank you so much for listening to me. You're not able to ask me any questions at the moment, but here is my email. Please do not hesitate to send me an email if you have any questions or if anything is not clear. And I would like to thank to my colleagues, especially Linda Stech, Judith de Groot, Jan Willem Bolderdijk, Kees Keizer, and Godefroy Levichute, whose research I heavily cited in this presentation. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me.